Hi, and welcome to a webinar hosted by the Jacksonville Women's Business Center. My name is Jackie Peralt, and with us here today is the U.S. Small Business Administration Disaster Assistance Team to be able to provide you with information around how to apply for an EIDL loan, whether or not you were affected by Hurricane Ian or Nicole. This information today will not only tell you about how to apply, but also the different qualifications and frequently asked questions that you may have in terms of receiving an economic injury disaster loan. With us here today is Brian Beard and Kathy Cook, and I will turn it over to Brian to begin the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Jackie, and welcome everyone. As she said, my name is Brian Beard. I'm a public affairs specialist with the Small Business Administration Disaster Assistance Program, and we're going to be talking about how you can apply for an economic injury disaster loan, or we refer to as an EIDL. And go ahead and next slide, please. Okay, so the SBA's economic injury disaster loans, or EIDLs, are low-interest loans that can help meet working capital needs due to a drop in sales caused by a declared disaster, such as Hurricane Ian or Nicole. These loans can help pay financial obligations and operating expenses, which could have been paid had the disaster not occurred. For example, fixed debt payments, payroll, accounts payable, utilities, etc. And can also be used to cover extraordinary expenses caused by the disaster, such as temporary storage of equipment and things if you had physical damage and need to get that out of the way while you're getting repairs done. The EIDLs do not replace lost revenue, lost profits, or fund expansion. Next slide, please. And these are working capital loans available in both the primary and contiguous counties of the Florida disaster declarations for Hurricane Ian, which occurred in late September, and because of the sustained flooding and swelling of the rivers, lasted all the way until November 4th for the incident period. And the deadline for filing for economic injury for that is June 29th. And for Hurricane Nicole, which occurred on November 7th, the incident period lasted through the 30th. And the deadline for filing for an economic injury loan for that is September 13th of 2023. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the basics about our economic injury loans. The examples of eligible businesses or industries that can apply include, but are not limited to, the following: hotels, recreational facilities, charter boats, marinas, manufacturers, sports vendors, owners of rental property, restaurants, retailers, souvenir shops, travel agencies, commercial fishermen, and wholesalers. Just want to say one thing about the owners of rental property. We have disaster loans for physical damage to one's primary residence, or home disaster loans, but that's only for the primary residence. But if you have a secondary home that you're using as a rental property and renting it out and paying taxes on that rental income, just like a business, then you can get a business disaster loan for physical damage or for the interruption in your rental income because the area around your rental property has been disturbed and people don't want to rent from you at that point. Okay, so what other criterion is involved? The applicant business must have a physical presence in the declared disaster county. And that's either in the primary county or the adjacent or contiguous counties, such as Duval or Clay County. And an applicant's economic presence alone in a declared area does not meet this requirement. The physical presence must be tangible and significant. So in other words, merely having a P.O. box in the disaster area would not qualify as a physical presence. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the loan requirements. For eligibility, the business must have a physical property in a declared county, such as we just mentioned in the previous slide. And also the applicants must have a credit history that is acceptable to the Small Business Administration. And the applicant also must show the ability to repay all the loans. Okay, next slide. Okay, the law gives SBA several powerful tools to make disaster loans affordable. We have low interest rates, and there's no cost to apply. Can provide refinancing of an emergency or bridge loan if the SBA loan is approved. That's a case-by-case basis. The loan term can be up to 30 years, depending upon your ability to pay. And the loans that are up to $25,000 or less do not have any collateral requirement and usually get processed more quickly. Total loans can be up to $2 million for businesses. The actual loan amount is determined by the Small Business Administration. So if approved, the interest rate for a loan under Hurricane Ian is 3.04% for small businesses and agricultural cooperatives, and 1.875% for nonprofit organizations. And the interest rates are adjusted each quarter for our disaster program. So under Hurricane Nicole, the interest rate for small businesses and agricultural cooperatives as low as 3.305%. And for nonprofit organizations, it is 2.375%. And next slide, please. Okay, the first step is to apply, and you can do that online at SBA's secured website, which you can see on the screen is https://disasterloan.sba.gov/ELA, and note that there's not a www in there, just as written. Or you can apply in person at either an SBA Business Recovery Center or at a disaster recovery center, which has both FEMA and SBA staff available. And the other option is by submitting an application through the mail. And I want to mention that an online application, electronic application, is more likely to be quicker in the processing. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the SBA will process the file and arrive at a decision, and that could take up to 2 to 3 weeks. Of course, if you didn't submit all the required documentation, they might come back and ask you for additional documents. And when the really big disasters such as Ian, sometimes that process can be a little bit longer because there's such a high volume of people applying for assistance. If approved, the loan documents are forwarded to the borrower. And if your application is declined, then the applicant would be advised of their rights to appeal and the process for doing so. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, an initial disbursement is generally made within 5 days after the applicant signs and returns the required loan closing documents. And SBA takes real estate as collateral when it is available, and that's for loans over $25,000. And SBA will not decline a loan for lack of collateral, but requires you to pledge that if, whatever you have available. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the SBA's economic injury disaster loans, or working capital loans, are available to small businesses, small agricultural cooperatives, small aquaculture businesses, fish farms, and most private nonprofit organizations of all sizes. So this includes businesses directly affected by the disaster. Your business has both physical damage and a loss of income. You could get, loans for both physical damage and the loss of income. But the economic injury loans are also available to businesses that offer services directly related to the businesses targeted in the declaration. So if you sell food and other things to a restaurant that was physically damaged and you're no longer able to make those sales to a lot of your customers, that's an economic injury. Or in a disaster that I worked in Alabama a few years ago, there was a university that had a lot of damage and was closed down for a couple semesters, and their suppliers of food and other things were severely affected and applied for an economic injury loan. But also other businesses indirectly related to the industry that are likely to be harmed by the losses in their community. So if along the coast of A1A in Florida, a lot of those hotels and restaurants are closed down because of damage, then other businesses nearby that rely on the tourism industry might be affected because the tourists don't want to go to the area because it's still suffering from the damage and rebuilding. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, small businesses in a declared disaster area that have suffered substantial economic injury may be eligible for an EIDL. And so that includes counties such as St. John's and Putnam and Flagler that were part of the declared disaster area, as well as adjacent or contiguous counties such as Duval and Clay or Bradford or Alachua. And substantial economic injury means the business is unable to meet its obligations and to pay its ordinary and necessary operating expenses. The economic injury disaster loans provide the necessary working capital to help small businesses until normal operations resume. Next slide, please. And SBA's disaster loans are different from SBA guaranteed loans, because the main part of SBA helps small businesses with startups and expansion, and they guarantee loans through regular banks, but our disaster program operates differently. The economic injury disaster loan funds come directly from the U.S. Treasury, and applicants do not go through a bank to apply. Instead, they apply directly to the SBA's disaster assistance program at disasterloan.sba.gov. There is no cost to apply. And for this fiscal year, there is no interest or payments for the first year of the loan. And there's no obligation to take the loan if it is offered. You know, once you've received the loan offer, you have 2 months to decide whether you want to accept it or not. And applicants can have an existing SBA disaster loan and still qualify for a loan for this disaster, but the loans cannot be consolidated together. I've spoken with a couple restaurant owners in Flagler Beach, for example, who already have a couple pre-existing SBA loans from previous disasters, and told them that yes, you can apply for an additional one. If you've already applied for a loan from Hurricane Ian, you can also apply for one from Hurricane Nicole. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Kathy Cook, and she's going to take the next dozen slides.
Thank you, Brian. I want to talk to you about the forms that you're going to have to supply in order to apply for the economic injury loan. So I'm going to briefly go over some of them. I know you can't see the form itself, but I'm going to describe to you what type of information is required. I personally think it's a good idea to go online to SBA's website and download the paper application and the forms. Take a look at them and see what information is required. Have those documents and information ready so that when you apply online, you have everything ready to go and it's a smooth transition. Do you have to apply online? No, but it is quicker and more accurate. It's quicker because your computer talks to SBA's computer direct. It is more accurate because when we have to transcribe documents that are handwritten, sometimes we misspell names, addresses. Even this morning, I was looking at a document and somebody abbreviated their name of the city, SEB. And I'm talking to you from Georgia, and I'm thinking, what city is SEB? I've never heard of such. And it's Sebastian. So we want to be cognizant of the fact that these applications are being processed by people in our office in Texas. And so don't use abbreviations that are locally known, because we don't know that PCB means Panama City Beach or that SAB means Sebastian. Next slide, please. Okay, probably the most important thing you can do is when you look at the application, look at the filing requirements. If you don't have the minimum filing requirements, meaning the application, a copy of your tax return, the form for the IRS, then we can't begin processing your application. So take a look at the filing requirements as you're gathering your information, and then take a look at the filing requirements again before you hit the submit button if you're applying electronically. Next slide, please. This is the application, and it asks information similar to any type of loan. What is your business's name? What is your business's trade name? What is the business's address? If you didn't have physical damage, we still need to know where the business is physically located. And we need to know who is involved in the ownership of the business. If you're a corporation, how many people own the corporation? Is it 2 people, 3 people, and what percentage do they own? If you have affiliate businesses, we need to know about that. If you're a sole proprietor, your trade name is the name that you're doing business as, but the legal name of the business is your name. If you're an LLC, the legal name of the business is the business that you registered under with the Secretary of State. If you're a corporation, the legal name of the business is the name on the Articles of Incorporation and how you registered with the Secretary of State. The same for a partnership. So be very careful about using the correct information when you start to complete the application. Next slide. The back of the application is the important part that asks questions about the ownership, and we need to be able to contact you. When SBA contacts you, our phones do not say, hey, the government's calling you, answer it. So during this period of time, don't think that a unidentified call is a robocall. Think, I applied for an SBA loan. This might be one of those calls because we need to reach you. Our email should always have a .gov, so you should be protected there. Next slide, please. We have 2 applications that you as a business owner can select from. If you are a sole proprietor, you can go and log in to the home loan application. It's a little bit easier and it requires less financial information than the business application for a corporation, a partnership, an LLC. So we allow you to use the home loan application, but make sure if you're applying for economic injury to check that box. Next slide, please. The most important thing, aside from submitting an application, is the tax form. SBA requires you to complete a request for tax transcripts. This is an IRS Form 4506C, and it must be submitted with the application. It is a filing requirement. If you don't send it in, your application will not be accepted. And you must submit the forms needed for your business structure. For instance, if you are a sole proprietor, you just need one form. But if you're a corporation and you have 4 members and each own 25% of the corporation, we need one of these tax forms for the corporation itself and for each of the owners of the corporation. If you have affiliate businesses, we may need this form on the affiliate business. If you own a partnership, we need one of the requests for the tax transcripts for the partnership itself and a separate one for the general partner. So what you need to do is when you start the process, read the instructions for completing the IRS tax authorization form. It is vital. And even if you just started your business, you must complete this form. Next slide, please. This is a personal financial statement. It is required on all of the owners that have 20% or more in the business. It is essentially a balance sheet. Assets and liabilities. Assets, what do you personally own and what do you personally owe? SBA uses this to establish repayment ability for the loan and sometimes to look for collateral. Again, if we're a corporation and we have 4 members, then we need 4 of the personal financial statements, 1 for each of the owners. Next slide, please. Schedule of liabilities. The business will need to prepare a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet. On a balance sheet, you will show liabilities, what you owe. But SBA, when we calculate your economic injury, we're going to try to approve you for a loan that will enable you to pay your normal expenses and the payments on any fixed debt. So that's why we ask you to fill out the schedule of liability so that we can include the payments on the fixed debts when we calculate what your loan needs are. Next slide, please. There may be additional filing requirements depending on what type of business you have and when you started your business. We generally need a minimum of 1 year, the most recent year of tax return for you personally and for the business. If you have the corporation and you have 4 principals that own 25% or more, then we're looking for the corporation's tax return and the tax return for each of the owners. So please take time to look at the filing requirements. Next slide, please. This is probably the next most important document for a loan officer when they're processing economic injury. We're going to take a look historically. What did your business do before? Before the hurricane started, what type of sales did you have for the last 3 years up to the most current month? If you want to go for the last 4 years to the current month, or if you just started and you want to put whatever sales you've had so far, maybe you've only been open 6 months, and then you can put projections for what you think you're going to do. SBA is going to look at what the business normally did and determine how long we think that you need funds to make your payments on your fixed debts and pay your expenses. And we use these sales to establish your business trend and to establish how much you think you're going to earn, or even what your sales have been since the hurricane happened. We've had several months since the hurricane. So normally you might have, $25,000 in sales every month. And then when the hurricane happened, now you've got 0, 0, 0. And then you're starting to repair, and then 10,000, 20,000, or maybe you had no physical damage. And so you had 25,000 each month all the previous year, and then you have zero for several months because nobody is coming down to the hurricane area. So even though you had no physical damage, you might not have any sales because the traffic with all the disaster workers, all the construction workers is impeding the tourists and keeping them from spending money in your store, your shop, your gas station, your grocery store. So take the time for this because it helps us establish your economic injury. Next slide, please. If you hire somebody to complete the application for you, we want to know what they charged, but it's not necessary for you to hire anybody because SBA has partners that will help complete the application and forms for you. Next slide. There are some businesses that are not eligible by law. And an example is an agricultural enterprise. If you're a farm or a ranch, SBA can't not lend to you. If you're a religious organization, we can lend to the church for its physical damage or the parochial school for its physical damage, but we cannot give money for working capital. Same for charitable organizations. The same for gambling concerns. Next slide, please. This is kind of how you get started. If you want to go online, this is the first screen you will see. You'll click the red button. Next slide, please. And then you'll have to read the terms and conditions, just like we do on any program. Once you accept it, you'll go to the next screen, please. And you'll have to set up an account. This is essential for you because this is the way we're going to communicate. We're going to go through a portal to your account with SBA. And like a lot of government agencies, with the federal government agencies, you're going to be working through login.gov. This account can be used for other agencies. Make sure that you keep your password. We will not be able to recover it for you. Next slide, please. Once you make your account, get your password, then you're going to come back and then you're going to start the actual application. If you need more information, look on the right-hand side at the bottom and click I need disaster assistance information. Next slide, please. We wanted to make sure that you understand that these are different loans as compared to COVID-19. If you applied for a COVID-19 economic injury disaster loan, the rules were totally different. The paperwork was totally different. As a matter of fact, initially, the Congress said that we could not request copies of tax returns. We didn't ask for profit and loss statements. We didn't ask for a balance sheet. All of these things that I just went over were not requirements for COVID. We are not talking about COVID loans when we're talking about Hurricane Ian or Hurricane Nicole. We are talking about disaster loans for different events, so you cannot measure one program against the other. Everything that you experience with COVID loans has nothing to do with applying for the hurricane loans. Next slide. Okay, one thing that we always get asked is, what can I use this money for? Economic injury disaster loans are for working capital, and it is replacing the money that you would have earned had the disaster not occurred. what do you normally do with the money that you earn in your business? Well, you probably make lease payments. You probably pay for payroll, insurance, utilities, all of these things. That's the same thing that this money is for. What I normally say is think about economic injury as working capital loan to keep the business in business in the way it could have if the disaster had not occurred. Not make you better, not make you worse, just keep your business going. SBA disaster loans cannot be forgiven. So if you are thinking that you're going to apply for this loan and that you're going to be able to ask SBA to just write it off or forgive it, that is not going to happen. We cannot, by law, forgive a disaster loan. If you have an existing loan, and I just thought about it the other day, in 1992, Hurricane Andrew happened. And there's some people that in 1993 had just gotten their SBA loan. If you have a 30-year loan, that loan is just getting paid off now. So you may have an existing disaster loan for another hurricane or for COVID. We cannot combine the loans at all. Each one stands on its own merit. Next slide, please. One frequently asked question is, I've got SBA loans. I still am paying on a hurricane 10 years ago, and I just applied for that COVID loan. Can I just take this new loan and pay off those loans? No, you cannot. Not allowable. What is allowable is we're going to give you money to make your normal fixed debt payments, but you are not going to be able to retire debt for your normal fixed payments. Next slide, please. We want to make sure that you understand that SBA offers two types of loans for businesses. One for repair and replacement, and the other is for working capital. If you apply for money for repairs and replacements, we will automatically consider that you are going to need some working capital. But if you did not have any physical damage, or if your insurance paid for all of your physical damage and you only need working capital because you did not have business interruption, then just apply for the economic injury loan. Next slide, please. If you have a paper loan application, this is the address you mail it to. And we will also be available to accept a paper application at any of the centers. So SBA is at the FEMA Disaster Recovery Centers, and SBA is at the SBA Business Recovery Centers. It is quicker for us to check in the paperwork and review it real quick and submit it for you than it is for you to mail it. And I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Next slide, please. Okay, to follow up on what Kathy said about the business recovery centers and the disaster recovery centers that we work at with FEMA, if you wanted to find out where your nearest center is, in this area, immediate area near Jacksonville, there is one at the Flagler County Fairgrounds, but that's only going to be open until the end of January. So you might be watching this webinar after that date, but there will be other disaster recovery centers and business recovery centers in operation farther south in Florida where more of the damage occurred. So you can go online and Google FEMA DRC locator and look for the disaster recovery center nearest to you, a little further south in Florida. Now, Kathy had also mentioned before that we have resource partners that may be able to help businesses, and not just during disasters, but we have several partners that help small businesses to successfully stay in business, to develop operational, financial, and marketing plans, and to consider alternate sources of revenue or identify ways to reduce costs for the business, and also to help update your management and technical services. So for the nearest office that might assist you, you can go to this website of www.sba.gov/local-assistance.
And Brian, as Jackie could confirm, these resource partners can help complete the paperwork, the financial documents, and the application for you at no charge. So if you are unsure how to complete a balance sheet, profit and loss, the application itself, then you can visit one of these centers and they can help you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kathy and Brian.
Yes, and we have, for those of you that are watching this recording before the middle of February, we're going to be having a training and workshop at the Jacksonville Main Library on February 16th from 2 to 4 p.m., where we'll have people from the SBDC, the Small Business Development Center, from their University of North Florida office, helping, and they can answer questions as well. But you can always contact your local SBDC office or your veteran business outreach center, or our SCORE partners, or Jackie at the WBC. Okay, next slide, please. And just to let you know that the University of North Florida office covers Duval and Clay County and St. John's and Putnam, but the Flagler County and Point South is covered by the University of Central Florida, the SBDC office there. But you can go to that website to track down who can best help you. Okay, so although the deadline to return the SBA Economic Injury Disaster Loan application is June 29th for Ian and September 13th for Nicole, we encourage everyone to submit the completed application as soon as possible. The biggest reason for delays in processing is due to missing information. So you want to make sure to complete all the filing requirements before submitting the application and forms. And if more funds are needed, if it takes longer for your business to recover than you thought, you can always submit supporting documents and request a increase in the amount of funding. And if less funds are needed, the applicants can request a reduction in the loan amount. As we said before, when you get a loan offer, you have 2 months to decide, and you can always decide to accept a smaller amount than what is offered. And if the loan request is denied, the applicant will be given up to 6 months in which to provide new information and submit a written request for reconsideration. So if you get denied, you can always reach out to the local SBDC office and get a business consultant to give you some advice on making sure that you have all the information necessary and are showing all of your assets, et cetera, to help with that appeal process. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so our Office of Disaster Assistance contacts for the public, as we've already mentioned, that you can go to www.sba.gov/disaster to get more information about all of our disaster loan programs, whether it's physical damage or the economic injury. And you can also always call our customer service center at 1-800-659-2955. And we also have the TTY there for those with hearing. Or you can email to disastercustomerservice@sba.gov. Okay, next slide. Okay, so for more information, as I said, you can go to our website at sba.gov/disaster. And, encourage you to go ahead and look into the process. And as we said before, you can always apply. And then if you do get offered a loan, you can decide you don't want it. You have 2 months to make that decision. So thanks again to Jackie and the Women's Business Center for hosting this webinar. And we wish you the best of luck in your recovery for everyone out there who has been affected by the hurricanes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian and Kathy, for providing this overview today. We really appreciate it. And just as mentioned, these are the people that you need to, if you have questions, to reach out to, as well as the North Florida Resource Partners. So utilize the Women's Business Center, the Small Business Development Center, and our SCORE chapter here in North Florida, and then the VBOC here that serves our entire state. And we'll be able to provide you with insight on how to get those applications in. With that, we will sound off, and I appreciate you both for your time today. We'll stop the recording, and this will be live on our YouTube channel. Thank you both.